What is a little bombshell your therapist dropped in one of your sessions that completely changed your outlook? I was struggling with my alcoholism, and we were discussing how I had been cutting back. She asked what I would consider success with regard to my drinking. I said I wanted to get to a point where it wasn't interfering with my daily life. I wanted to just be able to have a glass of wine at holiday dinners or family gatherings. She simply asked me why. Why was it important for me to drink at those times? It was as if she'd turned on a light. Alcohol had always been a key ingredient in every family function for my entire life. When I smell bourbon, I think of my uncle. When I smell vermouth, I think of my dad. Alcohol ran through almost every happy childhood memory, but even more than that, I was very afraid of the explanation I'd have to give when family and friends asked why I wasn't having a drink. I had tried to quit before, but failed. What if I admitted my problem only to fall off the wagon? When she asked why I didn't want to completely quit, it was the first time I saw that last part of big picture. I'd be willing to drink myself to death in order to avoid being scrutinized or judged for possible future failures. That was the day I quit. I've been sober since May 6th, 2017. 2,407 days. If you don't have these problems with any other person in your life, why do you think you're the problematic person in this one? I love this. I have a friend who I always seem to run into misunderstandings with. Every time we had a conversation, it somehow turned into a debate, even if it was me talking about my day. The conversations were never easy. I always evaluate myself first and take into consideration his critiques. He was very good at convincing me that I was contradicting myself or wasn't good at communicating my thoughts. I never had this issue with anyone else in my life. I kept trying to figure out where the miscommunication was coming from. In the end, I just minimized contact, and now I don't run into this issue. I read this quote somewhere once, and probably have it a bit wrong. It's a waste of time arguing with someone who is determined to misunderstand you. You can't control your emotions, but you can control what you do with them. At the time, I was a young adult who had learned zero healthy emotional regulation skills. Only suppression and shaming growing up. So this blew my mind. I had a therapist tell me feelings aren't facts, they're the reaction to facts. I've never forgotten that. Just because I reacted strongly to something doesn't alter the facts of what happened. I was raised that any disapproval was called yelling. I was a terrible partner because any disagreement meant my SO was yelling at me. They weren't. It sounds to me like you were trying to convince yourself to stay with your girlfriend. I'm not so sure it should be so difficult. At the time he said this, I remember it was like he said, "The earth is flat." I thought he was crazy when he suggested relationships don't need to be difficult, but eventually I started to realize I was trying to change myself in order to stay with this person, rather than just being who I am. It took me 3 more months to finally break up with her, but from that day on, I vowed to never again abandon myself just to be with someone I had convinced myself was better than me. I'm fortunate to be a student in my late 20s right now, and I got dumped from a 3-year relationship in Jan. I've had the time to reflect on the relationship and realized I did the exact same thing. I abandoned myself in that relationship because I hadn't had a long-term serious one before, and I thought I was learning about how it all worked and that they were better at it than me, so I stayed and tried to constantly fix things. I now know it wasn't them that was better than me, and I've stopped attributing my positive growth to them and claimed it for myself. I won't let myself be convinced I'm not enough again. Strangely, something I never had to deal with prior to the relationship. I was at a high-stress time and I asked her how people live like this. She replied, "Oftentimes they have cardiac events." She said it as an urging to care for myself as much as possible. This makes me laugh because I just find very direct replies like this to be so startlingly true and refreshing and needed. But it's nearly always the best advice you can get. I hit my friend with a similar one when she was asking how people manage to keep going when everything is a struggle, and I was like, they either don't struggle or they don't keep going, and when we start burning that fuse by being in the wrong mental space environment, it's finite. Why do you think you're lazy? Then she listed off all the things she knows I'm doing for my family, my job, and my life. It kind of blew my mind when I struggled to come up with an example. She also described family dysfunction as water. Some families are messed up in a way that everyone can see the huge waves across the surface. Others are better at hiding it. but there's still a riptide that you can't see unless you're also in the water. Made me realize that trying to keep the surface from ever rippling doesn't erase what is happening underneath. Accepting something doesn't mean you have to like it. That took away a lot of my inner conflicts about situations because I could accept a situation without expending energy internally fighting against the injustice of it. It's called radical acceptance in DBT. Yes, you come to acceptance, but you don't have to like it or condone it. This allows one to grow. Fun fact, during a group discussion about acceptance, in the manner that you're speaking about it, a person whose native language is Hebrew spoke up. They were having a very hard time with the discussion because the Hebrew word for acceptance inherently means that you condone it. So, just something to think about when talking to people from different cultures. I told her I think I'm just a weak person. She drew a timeline of the last year on a whiteboard and asked me what significant things had happened. I had 7 unrelated traumatic events unfold in that year, 2019, and I just stared at it. She told me most people only go through 1 to 3 traumatic events of that magnitude in their whole lifetime. And I cried. I didn't look at it and think, wow, life sucks for me. I looked at it and was amazed at my strength. Life kept throwing horrors at me, and yet there I was, sitting in therapy, still fighting. I still doubt my strengths, but whenever I remember that moment, I realize I am made of steel. You are not responsible for your parents' emotional well-being. They are independent adults who have been on this earth for many more years than you. Adult children of emotionally immature parents. Give the series a read. My therapist told me, "You will always be the child in this dynamic," as a follow-up to saying I'm not responsible for my parents' emotions. It really changed my perspective. Stop trying to get everyone to agree. When you need everyone to agree, the least agreeable person has all the power. Really changed my outlook on planning family events. I've always said that in the absence of real leadership, the biggest whiner usually gets what they want. Same idea. Especially in social situations, real leadership is exceedingly rare. I've heard a quote something like, "Power without character is evil." Furthermore, character is a victory, not a gift. Don't think of the relationship as over. Think of it as complete. Fundamentally changed how I was processing a tough breakup. So helpful. You complete me. Welp, guess it's time. Slaps knees and stands up, take it easy. This visual really made me chuckle. I've never really had friends. I've had colleagues and classmates and housemates and people who have hung out with me, but I never really felt close to any of them. And I did that thing you see on here sometimes. I stopped reaching out to see if I would be reached out to, and I wasn't, which I took as confirmation that they didn't really want me around. Or at the very least, that they wouldn't mind my absence. I was talking to my therapist about people I'd been close to in college, and she told me to pick one and talk about him. So I did. And after I shared some basic stuff like his name and his major, etc., and a couple anecdotes, she asked me what else I knew about him, and I couldn't answer. It wasn't really a broadly applicable bombshell, but she said what else, and I started crying because I realized that for as simple as the question was, my inability to answer spoke volumes. I've never had good friends because I've never been a good friend. I'm withdrawn and reserved, and I always made others do the work to drag me out without ever extending my own friendship in a meaningful way in return. If I wanted to have meaningful relationships with other people, I would have to build them. I'm still working on this, but I'm trying to make more offers and extend more friendliness to others in my daily life. Sorry, I know this is late and the thread has probably died already, but I fell asleep shortly after writing this. I'm in Japan and the time zone is very mismatched. Several comments have asked me what specifically I've changed, and I have 2 answers. One is to put myself in a position to find people with shared interests. A look at my profile will confirm that I love One Piece and manga in general. While I'm here, I booked a tour to visit the statues of the characters erected in the artist's home prefecture of Kumamoto. The tour was public, and it ended up being 6 people total. We bonded over our shared love of the material, and at the end of the tour, 2 people, a couple, invited me to join them for dinner afterward. It was the first time I felt like I'd been invited to something because the inviter genuinely wanted to spend more time with me. I was elated. We talked for 3 hours about theories, favorite moments, real-world meanings and effects, and all sorts of things. The second is that I'm making an effort to ask more questions. I tend to talk without stopping when I get on a topic I'm passionate about. So when I catch myself doing that, I try to stop myself naturally and ask the other person for their input, or segue into a more personal topic. I want to learn more about these people so that I can be a better friend to them. I learned about them outside of their favorite arc or quote, and I'm glad I did. How was anger expressed in your household growing up? Were you allowed to show anger? At which point I realized I wasn't allowed to show any negative emotions whatsoever, especially not in reaction to negative emotions from my parents. I had the opposite experience. The only way I could communicate with my dad was through anger. Of course, growing up like that, I brought it to school and friendships. I was just this stupid, angry kid for no reason. My best friend told me that he liked me, but my anger was really pushing everyone away from me, and it opened my eyes. I kind of vowed to be a different person than my dad, and I tried and currently trying to be a very kind person. I became scared of who I was on the inside, so scared that it was kind of anxiety-inducing. I went to therapy within the last year, and my therapist said that how we deal with situations is deeply rooted in our first social relationships, which are usually with our parents. Anger has become my default mode that I switch to when reasoning becomes difficult. I think realizing that and accepting who I am and being conscious of the progress I've made has helped me a lot in terms of becoming comfortable in my own skin for once. Your mom is never going to be the parent you want or need, so stop expecting her to be and being mad that she isn't. Also, people who are addicts tend to get frozen at the time they started abusing drugs or alcohol because their focus is their addiction and not developing as a person. So a person who started drinking heavily at 13 and quit at 30 would behave a lot like a 13-year-old. My counselor said to imagine myself as an orange. Then, consider that not all people like oranges. That doesn't mean that the orange is flawed in any way, not rotten, just that everyone has preferences. That helped ease my insecurities and need for people pleasing dramatically. If you literally lay down and let people walk all over you, someone would complain that you're not flat enough. Goes well with you can give someone the moon and they'll say they didn't ask for it. I don't want to take meds because I don't want to rely on drugs to feel okay. Don't you already do that? My therapist in the session before I finally saw a psychiatrist and got officially diagnosed with bipolar 2. I was heavily self-medicating at the time, but of course didn't see it that way because it wasn't a prescription. That one hit deep. I've said the first line multiple times. No one has ever said the second. Thank you so much for watching. And what little bombshell did your therapist use in one of your sessions that completely changed your worldview? Share it in the comments.